The white lace of Helena Marie's wedding dress caught on a splinter as she vaulted over the wooden fence behind St. Catherine's Church, tearing a jagged line up the hem that she barely registered through the thunder of her heartbeat. The August sun blazed mercilessly over Pioche, Nevada, turning the dusty street into a shimmering mirage as she ran, her breath coming in gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the fear that had been building in her chest for 3 long months. Behind her, she could hear the confusion erupting from the church, voices raised in shock and alarm. Her father would be furious. Margaret Winters, her future mother-in-law, would be scandalized. And Charles Winters himself, the man she had been about to marry just moments ago, would be something far worse than angry. That was precisely why she ran. The road out of Pioche stretched before her like a ribbon of salvation, winding between the scrubby desert landscape, dotted with Joshua trees and sagebrush. Her borrowed white satin shoes, meant for standing prettily at an altar rather than fleeing down a dirt road, were already gathering dust and small stones that bit into her feet with each desperate step. The veil had torn free somewhere near the church gate, a white ghost left behind to mark her passage. Helena had made it perhaps half a mile when she heard the sound of hoofbeats and wagon wheels approaching from ahead. Her heart seized with new panic. Had words somehow traveled faster than her feet? But no, that was impossible. She slowed her frantic pace, pressing one hand to the painful stitch developing in her side, and squinted against the glare to make out the approaching figure. A single horse pulled a modest wagon, and atop the driver's seat sat a man in dusty trail clothes and a weather-beaten hat pulled low against the sun. As the distance between them closed, Helena could make out more details. Broad shoulders, a dark beard, and eyes that seemed to assess her situation with a single sweeping glance that took in her elaborate wedding dress, her desperate flight, and the empty road behind her. The man pulled his horse to a stop beside her, and Helena found herself looking up at a face that was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 25 years to her 21. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the desert, and they held a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through the panic still racing through Helena's veins. She should have been cautious. A proper lady did not accept rides from strange men, particularly not when dressed in a wedding gown and running from her own ceremony. But Helena had just left propriety standing at the altar back in that church, along with a future that would have slowly suffocated the life out of her. "Yes," she said, the word coming out hoarse from her dry throat and heaving lungs. "Yes, please. I need to get as far from Pioche as possible." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, and Helena had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen, as if those storm-colored eyes could read the story of her flight in the tear tracks on her cheeks and the determination in her stance. Then he reached down, extending a calloused hand. "Name is Kade Warner," he said, "and I reckon a woman running from her own wedding in the middle of the Nevada desert has a pretty good reason for it." Helena grasped his hand, feeling the strength in it as he pulled her up onto the wagon seat beside him with surprising ease. The wedding dress, with its layers of silk and lace, complicated the maneuver considerably, but she managed to settle herself while clutching great handfuls of fabric to keep it from spilling over the side. "Helena Marie," she replied, then hesitated. She would not give him her family name yet. That connection to her old life felt like a chain she needed to shed. "And you would be right about the reason." Kade made a clicking sound with his tongue, and the horse started forward at a steady walk. He did not immediately press for details, which Helena appreciated more than he could know. Instead, He pulled a canteen from beneath the seat and offered it to her. "You will want water," he said simply. "It is a long road to anywhere from here, and that dress was not exactly made for desert travel." Helena accepted the canteen gratefully, taking several long swallows of the lukewarm but blissfully wet contents. As she drank, she studied her rescuer from the corner of her eye. Kade Warner had the look of a man who spent his life outdoors, with sun-weathered skin and small lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into bright horizons. His hands on the reins were competent and sure, and there was a calmness about him that seemed to extend even to his horse, a sturdy chestnut mare with kind eyes. "Where were you headed?" Helena asked, finally breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly a mile. Behind them, Pioche was disappearing into the heat shimmer, and with it, her old life. "Carson City," Kade replied. "Got some business there with a man about a horse ranch. Well, several horses actually. I have been working cattle drives the past 6 years, saving up to start my own place. Finally got enough together to make it happen." He glanced at her sidelong. "You are welcome to ride along as far as you need. Cannot say this is the strangest thing I have encountered on the trail, but it ranks fairly high." Despite everything, Helena felt a small laugh escape her. It came out slightly hysterical, edged with the panic she was still holding at bay. "I imagine I make quite a picture." "That you do," Kade agreed, but his tone was not unkind. "Though I have learned not to judge a situation until I know the whole story, and sometimes not even then." The sun climbed higher as they traveled, and Helena felt the weight of her decision beginning to settle over her like a heavy blanket. She had done it. She had actually run. For weeks she had fantasized about it, lying awake in her childhood bed while her mother planned menus, and her father counted the business advantages of uniting the Marie and Winters families. But fantasy and reality were vastly different things. Charles Winters owned half of Pioche, including the silver mine that employed most of the town. He was 43 years old, twice widowed, and looking for a young wife to give him heirs and grace his dinner table. Helena's father, who managed the mine's operations, had seen the match as an opportunity too valuable to pass up. Her own wishes had been, at best, a secondary consideration. She had tried to be dutiful. She had attended the courtship dinners, accepted Charles's gifts, and smiled through the engagement party. But every interaction with her intended had left her feeling increasingly trapped. Charles was not overtly cruel, but there was a coldness to him, a sense of ownership in the way he looked at her that made her skin crawl. And there were rumors, whispered things about his previous wives and why they had both died so young, that her mother had dismissed as malicious gossip, but that Helena could not ignore. The final straw had come 3 days before the wedding, when she had overheard Charles talking with his lawyer in her father's study. They had been discussing property and assets, and Charles had referred to her as the acquisition with the same tone he might use for a promising mining claim. In that moment, standing frozen in the hallway, Helena had known with absolute certainty that she could not go through with the marriage. Planning her escape had been hasty and probably foolish. She had a small purse hidden in the folds of her dress, containing the little bit of money she had managed to save from birthday gifts over the years, perhaps $30 in total. She had no spare clothes, no clear destination, and no real plan beyond getting away from Pioche and the future that waited for her there. "You can tell me it is none of my business," Kade said, pulling Helena from her spiraling thoughts. "But are you safe? Is someone likely to come after you meaning harm?" The directness of the question startled her, but Helena recognized the genuine concern behind it. She considered her answer carefully. Charles was proud and would be humiliated by her flight, but would he actually pursue her? Her father certainly would, but he was a businessman, not a tracker. By the time they organized any kind of search, she could be far enough away to disappear into the vastness of the Nevada territory. "I do not think so," she said slowly. "Not immediate danger, anyway. The man I was supposed to marry is powerful in Pioche, but his pride might actually work in my favor. I cannot imagine he will want to advertise that his bride ran away." Kade nodded thoughtfully. "Pride can be a funny thing, make some men dangerous and others just stupid." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "Still, might be wise to put some distance between you and that church before nightfall. There is a way station about 20 miles ahead where we can stop. Not much, but they have water and provisions. You might want to consider trading that dress for something more practical." Helena looked down at the elaborate gown, now dusty and torn, that represented everything she was leaving behind. The thought of parting with it held no sentimentality, but practical considerations presented themselves. "I do not have much money," she admitted. "Certainly not enough for proper traveling clothes." "I might be able to help with that," Kade said. "I know the woman who runs the station. She takes in cast-off clothes sometimes, sells them to travelers who need them. That dress, even in rough shape, is probably worth more than anything she has on hand. Might even leave you with coin to spare." It was a solution Helena had not considered, and she felt a rush of gratitude toward this stranger who was proving to be far more helpful than he had any obligation to be. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Helping me, I mean. You do not know me or anything about my situation. For all you know, I could be the villain in this story." Kade was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was sharing something important. 6 years ago, my sister ran away from home. She was 17 and engaged to a man my father picked out, a wealthy rancher twice her age who had a reputation for violence. She tried to tell Pa about it, about things the man had done, but Pa did not want to hear it. The marriage would have secured water rights we needed. Helena's breath caught. She had a feeling she knew where this story was going. "Sarah made it about 10 miles before her horse went lame," Kade continued. "She was walking along the road when her intended and his men caught up with her. They brought her back." He paused, his jaw tightening. "She went through with the wedding because by then she did not have a choice. I was 15 and working a cattle drive in Wyoming. By the time I got home 3 months later, she was dead. Fell down the stairs, they said. Broke her neck." "I am so sorry," Helena whispered, the words feeling inadequate for the pain she could hear beneath Kade's careful monotone. "The point is," Kade said, "I did not know then what I know now. Did not understand what she was running from or why. If I had, maybe I could have done something. So when I see a woman fleeing her wedding in the middle of the Nevada desert, I figure the least I can do is offer her a ride. Whatever your story is, I reckon you have got good cause to be running." They traveled in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Helena felt the weight of Kade's trust in her judgment, his willingness to help without demanding explanations or trying to control her choices. It was so foreign to her experience that she hardly knew how to process it. The landscape rolled past them in waves of red rock and sparse vegetation. Occasionally, they passed other travelers heading toward Pioche, miners mostly, who called out greetings that Kade returned with an easy wave. None of them seemed to register anything particularly odd about Helena's appearance, or perhaps they were simply too focused on their own business to care about a woman in a wedding dress sitting beside a cowboy on a wagon. As the afternoon wore on, Helena began to feel the full impact of her sleepless night and the emotional upheaval of the day. Her body ached from tension and the hard wagon seat, and despite her best efforts, her eyes kept drifting closed. "You can rest if you need to," Kade said gently. "We have got a few hours yet before we reach the station. Road is smooth enough here that you will not get thrown around much." Helena wanted to protest that she was fine, but exhaustion won out over pride. She settled herself as best she could on the wagon seat, using a coil of rope behind them as a makeshift pillow. The rhythmic sound of the horses' hooves and the creaking of the wagon wheels lulled her into a doze that quickly deepened into sleep. She woke to the sensation of the wagon stopping and Kade's hand gently shaking her shoulder. "We are here," he said quietly. "Sun will be setting soon." Helena sat up, disoriented and stiff, blinking against the slanted golden light of late afternoon. Before them stood a low adobe building with a weathered wooden sign proclaiming it Mabel's Station. A few horses were tied up outside, and smoke rose from a chimney despite the heat. Kade helped her down from the wagon, his hands steady on her waist as she navigated the awkward descent in her cumbersome dress. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, numb from hours of sitting, and she grabbed his arm for balance. "Easy," he said. "Take a minute to get your bearings." A woman emerged from the station, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50 years old, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that took in Helena's appearance with a single glance. "Kade Warner," she said, her stern expression softening into something almost like pleasure. "Been a while since you passed through these parts, and you brought me a mystery, I see." "Hello, Mabel," Kade replied with genuine warmth. "This is Helena. She is in need of some help, and I figured if anyone could provide it, you could." Mabel's eyes lingered on the wedding dress, taking in its quality and condition, before returning to Helena's face. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied some internal assessment because she nodded briskly. "Come inside, girl. You look like you have had quite a day." The interior of the way station was simple but clean, with a main room that served as both dining area and store. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with basic provisions, ammunition, and various items of clothing. A few travelers sat at the long wooden table, eating what smelled like stew, and they looked up with curiosity as Helena entered. Mabel led them to a corner away from the other patrons, her manner shifting from businesslike to almost maternal. "Now then," she said, addressing Helena directly, "Kade says you need help, and I can see you need practical clothes. That dress is beautiful work, but it will not get you far in this country. I have got some things that might fit you, and if you are willing to part with that gown, we can work out a fair trade." Relief flooded through Helena. "Yes, please. I would be grateful for anything suitable for travel. Thought you might say that." Mabel studied Helena's frame with a practiced eye. "I have got a split riding skirt that should fit you well enough, couple of shirtwaists, and some proper boots. There is a room in back where you can change and clean up a bit. I will throw in use of the washing basin and some dinner for you and Kade both. That dress is fine enough that I will come out ahead even with all that." "Thank you," Helena said, meaning it with her whole heart. "You do not know what this means to me." Mabel's expression softened further. "I have been in this business long enough to recognize a woman in need of a fresh start. Go on now, get yourself sorted. Kade, you want to tend your horse. I will have food ready when you are both done." The room Mabel showed Helena to was barely larger than a closet, but it held a washing basin with wonderfully cool water, a small mirror, and a pile of clothing as promised. Helena closed the door and immediately began the complex process of removing the wedding dress, her fingers fumbling with buttons and laces that her mother's maid had fastened just that morning, a lifetime ago. When the dress finally pooled at her feet, Helena stepped out of it and stood in just her undergarments, feeling lighter than she had in months. She washed her face and arms, scrubbing away the dust and sweat of the day, and studied her reflection in the mirror. Her dark hair, which had been elaborately styled with flowers and pins, had come partially undone during her flight and ride. She pulled out the remaining pins, letting it fall in waves past her shoulders, and used her fingers to work out the worst of the tangles. The clothes Mabel had provided were well worn but serviceable. The split riding skirt was a practical brown canvas that would show dirt less readily than Helena's usual attire, and the 2 cotton shirtwaists, one cream and one pale blue, were simple but well made. There was also a leather vest, a wide-brimmed hat, and a pair of boots that were only slightly too large, fixable with an extra pair of thick socks. Helena, dressed in the cream shirtwaist and brown skirt, laced up the boots and studied herself in the mirror again. The transformation was remarkable. She looked like a different person, someone capable and independent rather than the decorative object her father had tried to make her. The thought brought a fierce satisfaction that surprised her with its intensity. She bundled up the wedding dress, holding it for a moment as she considered what it represented. Then she carried it out to where Mabel waited, already prepared to negotiate with whatever traveling merchants might want such a fine garment. Kade was sitting at the long table when Helena emerged, but he looked up at her entrance and something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, a slight widening of his eyes, but Helena felt suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "That is much more practical," he said, his voice a bit rougher than usual. "You look ready to travel now." "I feel ready," Helena replied, taking the seat across from him. The physical transformation seemed to have completed some internal shift as well. She was no longer Helena Marie, dutiful daughter and reluctant bride. She was simply Helena, a woman making her own choices for the first time in her life. Mabel brought them both bowls of hearty venison stew and thick slices of bread, and Helena discovered she was ravenous. She could not remember the last time she had eaten, probably breakfast the day before. The wedding morning had been too fraught with nerves for her to consider food. As they ate, other travelers came and went, creating a buffer of noise and activity that allowed Helena and Kade to talk without being overheard. Kade told her more about his plans for the horse ranch, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm as he described the property he hoped to secure near Carson City. "It has got good water, decent grazing, and it is far enough from the main routes that you are not constantly dealing with drifters but close enough to markets that you can sell your stock," he explained. "I have been studying horse breeding for years, reading everything I can get my hands on. There is good money in it if you know what you are doing, and I have always had a way with horses." "It sounds wonderful," Helena said, and found that she meant it. There was something compelling about Kade's quiet passion, his careful planning toward a goal he had been working toward for years. It was so different from the men she had known in Pioche, who had inherited their wealth and positions and seemed to expect the world to arrange itself for their convenience. "What about you?" Kade asked. "Once you get clear of Pioche and whatever you are running from, what happens then? Do you have family elsewhere, friends who can help?" The question brought Helena up short. She had been so focused on escaping that she had given little real thought to what came after. "I have an aunt in San Francisco," she said slowly. "My mother's sister. We exchanged letters sometimes, and she always seemed more understanding than the rest of my family. She is unmarried, runs her own boarding house. I thought perhaps I could go there, find some kind of work." "San Francisco is a long way from here," Kade observed. "Expensive to get to as well. You will need more than the coin from that dress." "I know." Helena felt the weight of her situation settling over her again. She had maybe $30 of her own money plus whatever the dress would bring. Even in 1885, that would not get her far, especially not across the Sierra Nevada to California. I will figure something out. I can work, save up what I need. I am not afraid of hard work. Kade studied her across the table, and Helena had the sense he was measuring something, coming to some decision. Carson City is on the way to California, he said carefully. If you wanted to come along that far, I could use someone to help with the horses once I get them. Most of the stock I am buying is young, needs training. Having an extra pair of hands would be useful, and I could pay you for the work. Might take a few months, but you could earn enough to get you to San Francisco with something to spare. The offer hung in the air between them, generous almost to the point of being suspicious. Helena wanted to accept immediately, but caution made her hesitate. Why would you do that? You have already helped me more than I had any right to expect. Because you need help and I can provide it, Kade said simply. And because I meant what I said earlier about my sister. I could not help Sarah, but maybe I can help you. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I really could use someone who knows their way around horses. You do know horses, do not you? I grew up riding, Helena confirmed. My father kept a stable and I spent more time there than I did in drawing rooms, much to my mother's despair. I can handle horses well enough. Then it is settled, Kade said with satisfaction. You will come to Carson City with me, help me get the ranch started, and earn enough to get yourself to San Francisco safely. Fair wage for fair work, and you will have time to figure out exactly what you want to do next. Helena felt something in her chest loosen, a tightness she had been carrying since the moment she decided to run. For the first time since fleeing the church, she had something resembling a plan, a path forward that did not feel quite so terrifyingly uncertain. Thank you, she said, and this time the words carried the full weight of her gratitude. You have given me more than just a ride. You have given me a chance. Everyone deserves a chance, Kade replied. Come on, let us see about getting you some supplies for the road. If we leave at first light, we can make Carson City in 4 days, maybe 3 if the weather holds. They spent the remainder of the evening preparing for the journey ahead. Mabel, who seemed to understand the situation without needing explicit explanations, helped Helena assemble a basic travel kit. A bedroll, a canteen, some preserved food, and a few other necessities. The wedding dress more than covered the cost, with enough left over to give Helena a small cushion of funds. As darkness fell, Mabel showed Helena to a small room where she could sleep. It was barely large enough for the narrow cot it contained, but it had a door that locked and a window that opened to the desert breeze, and Helena felt safer than she had in weeks. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the way station settling for the night. Somewhere in the building, she could hear Kade's low voice talking with Mabel, though she could not make out the words. She wondered what Charles was doing right now, whether he was angry or relieved or simply annoyed at the inconvenience. She wondered if her mother was crying or her father was cursing her name. Then she decided she did not care. Whatever they felt, whatever they thought, it was no longer her concern. She had made her choice and she would live with the consequences. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Helena finally drifted off to sleep with the desert wind singing softly through the window, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring her further from her old life, and closer to something new and unknown. Morning came early, announced by roosters, and the sounds of Mabel moving around the kitchen. Helena rose quickly, splashing water on her face and braiding her hair into a practical plait that she pinned up under the wide-brimmed hat. The woman who looked back at her from the small mirror was almost unrecognizable, and Helena found she liked this stranger better than the one she had left behind. Kade was already loading the wagon when she emerged, his movements efficient and practiced. He had acquired additional supplies as well, she noticed, and the wagon bed now held several bales of hay and sacks of grain. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," Helena admitted. "Thank you again for everything." "I know I keep saying it, but I do not know how else to express what you have done for me." "You can express it by being a good hand with those horses I am about to invest my savings in," Kade replied easily. "Come on." Mabel packed us some breakfast to eat on the road. "Daylight is burning, and we have got ground to cover." They said their goodbyes to Mabel, who pressed an extra package of food into Helena's hands along with some quiet words of encouragement. "You have got a good head on your shoulders, girl," she said. "Trust your instincts. They got you this far." The road north from Mabel's station was rougher than the one they had traveled the day before, winding through increasingly rugged terrain as they left the immediate vicinity of Pioche behind. Kade kept the horse to a steady pace, not pushing but making consistent progress. They talked more easily now, the initial awkwardness of strangers giving way to the beginnings of companionship. Kade told Helena about his years working cattle drives, the hard lessons learned, and the characters he had encountered. His stories were vivid and often funny, painting a picture of a life lived close to the bone but rich in experience. Helena, in turn, found herself opening up about her own life, though it felt pale and constrained compared to Kade's adventures. She talked about her love of horses, her frustration with the limited options available to women of her class, and eventually, haltingly, about Charles Winters and the increasing dread she had felt as the wedding approached. "He was not overtly cruel during our courtship," she explained, watching the desert landscape roll past. "But there was something in the way he looked at me, the way he talked about our future. Everything was about what I would do for him, how I would serve his needs and advance his position. I never got the sense that he saw me as a person with my own thoughts and desires." "Some men are like that," Kade said quietly. "They see women as property to be acquired rather than people to be partnered with. My father was that way, and it destroyed my mother long before she actually died." "Is he still alive?" "Your father, as far as I know. We do not speak." Kade's jaw tightened slightly. "After what happened to Sarah, I told him exactly what I thought of him and his business arrangements. He told me to get out and not come back until I had learned some respect." "That was 6 years ago. Do you regret it?" Helena asked. "Leaving your family like that?" Kade considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I regret that I did not leave sooner, take Sarah with me, but as for walking away from my father, no, some bridges need to be burned." They stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat some of Mabel's provisions. The sun was brutal, and even in her more practical clothing, Helena felt the heat like a physical weight. Kade showed her how to wet a bandana and tie it around her neck to help cool herself, and they sought what shade they could find under an outcropping of red rock. "Can I ask you something?" Helena said as they sat in the relative coolness, sharing water from the canteen. "Sure. Why horses?" "You said you have been planning this ranch for years, but you never said why horses specifically." Kade smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less burdened by the past. "When I was a boy, maybe 7 or 8, we had this horse on our ranch. Old gelding named Copper, rusty-colored with a white star on his forehead. He was supposed to be a work horse, pulling plows and wagons, but he had been mistreated before we got him and he did not trust people much." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Everyone else just wrote him off as mean and stubborn, but I spent time with him, just sitting in his stall and talking to him. Did that for weeks before I even tried to touch him. Eventually he decided I was all right, and he became the gentlest horse you could ask for," at least with me. My father said it was a waste of time, that an animal was just a tool to be used, but I knew different. Copper taught me that every creature has their own mind, their own worth beyond what they can do for you. I have been working with horses ever since, and I have never found anything I am better at or care more about. Helena felt something shift in her chest as she listened to Kade's story. There was a gentleness in him that contrasted sharply with his rough exterior, a capacity for patience and empathy that she found deeply appealing. She was beginning to understand that her initial rescue had been no random act of kindness, but rather an expression of fundamental character. "I think Copper was lucky to have you," she said softly. "I think I was lucky to have him," Kade replied. "He showed me what I wanted to do with my life. Not many people get that kind of clarity." They pressed on through the afternoon, the landscape gradually shifting from desert scrub to the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The air grew slightly cooler, and pine trees began to appear among the rocks and brush. As evening approached, they reached another small settlement, barely more than a cluster of buildings around a crossroads. Kade knew the man who ran the trading post there, a grizzled old-timer named Pete who greeted them with enthusiasm and immediately launched into news and gossip about every mutual acquaintance he could think of. He barely seemed to notice Helena, for which she was grateful. The further they got from Pioche, the safer she felt, but she was still half expecting someone to recognize her or demand explanations. They purchased a few more supplies and made camp just outside the settlement, under a stand of pines that provided welcome cover. Kade built a small fire and showed Helena how to make coffee in a battered tin pot, the smell rich and comforting in the gathering darkness. "Tomorrow we will reach the mountains properly," Kade said as they sat by the fire, their bellies full of beans and bacon. "The pass can be tricky this time of year. Still some snow in the high places, though the main road should be clear enough." "I have never been over the Sierras," Helena admitted. "Never been much of anywhere, really. Pioche was my whole world until yesterday." "It is a big world," Kade said. "Lots to see in it. Might be you will find that running away was really running toward something better." Helena considered that. In the firelight, Kade's face was all plains and shadows, strong and solid and somehow reassuring. She realized with a start that she felt comfortable with him, truly comfortable in a way she had never felt with Charles or even with most of the people she had grown up around. There was no pretense with Kade Warner, no social games or hidden agendas. He was simply and honestly himself. "Can I ask you something else?" she ventured. "You seem to be full of questions today," Kade replied, but his tone was amused rather than annoyed. "Why have you not married? You are a good man, hardworking, kind. Most men your age are already settled." Kade was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I suppose I have been too focused on building something first. Growing up the way I did, seeing what my father's need to control everything did to my family, I swore I would not marry until I could offer a woman a true partnership. Not a business arrangement or a property transaction, but an actual life built together. That means having something to build from, a foundation that is mine, free and clear." "That is a rare attitude," Helena observed. "Maybe. But I have seen too many marriages that were really just contracts, people bound by obligation rather than choice. When I marry, if I marry, I want it to be because we both want to wake up next to each other every day, not because society or family or economics demanded it." He looked up from the fire, meeting her eyes. "I want what my parents never had, what you were running from yesterday." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Helena felt her heart begin to beat faster, though she could not have said exactly why. There was nothing overtly romantic in what Kade had said, but the intimacy of the conversation, the firelight, and the vast darkness of the wilderness around them created a bubble of connection that felt significant. "I hope you find that," she said finally. "You deserve it." "So do you," Kade replied quietly. "Whatever you decide to do, wherever you end up, I hope you find a life that feels like yours." They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the night. Eventually, Kade banked the flames, and they arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the dying embers, a respectful distance apart. Helena lay awake for a while, watching stars wheel overhead through the pine branches, and found herself thinking about what she wanted from life now that she was free to choose. The next day brought them into serious mountain terrain. The road climbed steadily, winding through passes and along cliffsides that made Helena grateful for Kade's steady hand with the reins. The horse, whose name was Molly, proved to be as reliable as her owner, navigating the treacherous path with calm competence. They saw other travelers now, prospectors heading to new claims, families seeking opportunities in California, and the occasional freight wagon struggling with heavy loads. Everyone seemed to have a story, a reason for being on this difficult road, and Helena found herself fascinated by the glimpses into lives so different from the one she had known. Late in the afternoon, as they were rounding a particularly narrow section of road with a steep drop off to one side, they encountered a stagecoach coming from the opposite direction. There was barely room for both vehicles, and complicated negotiations ensued about who should back up to find a wider spot. While Kade and the stagecoach driver discussed the situation, one of the passengers, a well-dressed woman of middle years, leaned out the window to assess the delay. Her eyes swept past Helena once, then returned with a look of sharp recognition that made Helena's blood run cold. "Helena Marie. Is that you?" Helena's mind raced. The woman was Margaret Howard, a friend of her mother's from Pioche who had moved to Carson City 2 years ago. Of all the people to encounter on this mountain road, she could hardly have chosen worse. "I am sorry," Helena said, forcing her voice to remain calm. "I think you have me confused with someone else." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "No, I am quite sure. I was at your wedding just yesterday. Or rather, I was supposed to be. You caused quite the scandal, disappearing like that right before the ceremony." Her gaze shifted to Kade, taking in his trail-worn appearance, and her expression turned calculating. "I see. Running off with a cowboy. How utterly common." Helena felt anger flare hot in her chest. "You do not know anything about my situation, Mrs. Howard." "I know that your poor mother was beside herself," Margaret replied primly, "and that Charles Winters was absolutely humiliated. Your father has put up a reward, you know. $500 for information leading to your safe return." She smiled, a thin expression with no warmth in it. "I imagine he will be very interested to know I found you." Kade had finished his discussion with the driver and returned in time to hear this last exchange. His expression hardened. "I reckon that is between Helena and her family," he said evenly. "No need for you to insert yourself into private business." "Private business?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "She is an unmarried woman traveling alone with a strange man. That makes it everyone's business, particularly when there is a reward involved." "I am not alone against my will," Helena said firmly, finding her courage. "And I am not returning to Pioche, no matter what my father is offering." "You can tell him that if you like, or you can mind your own concerns and let me mind mine." Margaret looked genuinely shocked, as if Helena had grown a second head. In her world, young women did not speak so directly or refuse so bluntly. "Well," she said finally, "I can see you have fallen quite far in just 2 days. I will certainly inform your father of this development. Good day." She withdrew into the stagecoach, which had finally been maneuvered past Kade's wagon, and within moments, the whole party was disappearing down the mountain road behind them. Helena watched them go with a sinking feeling in her stomach. "This is going to cause problems," she said quietly. "Maybe," Kade agreed. "But we are still 2 days from Carson City, and they are heading the opposite direction. By the time word gets back to Pioche and your father organizes any kind of response, we will be long gone. And Carson City is big enough that you can disappear into it if you need to." "Unless Mrs. Howard spreads the story around Carson City," Helena pointed out. "She has friends there. She could make things very difficult." "Then we will deal with that when it happens," Kade said calmly. "Come on, we should put some more distance behind us before we stop for the night. Just in case." They pushed on until well after dark, finally making camp in a secluded spot off the main road. Kade was more alert than usual, and Helena noticed he kept his rifle close at hand. The encounter with Mrs. Howard had changed the tenor of their journey, introducing an element of pursuit that made Helena anxious. "I am sorry," she said as they sat by the fire, both of them too restless to sleep despite their exhaustion. "I have dragged you into my problems now. If my father sends men looking for me, you could be accused of kidnapping or worse." "You did not drag me into anything," Kade replied firmly. "I offered you help of my own free will with full knowledge that you were running from something. Whatever comes, we will face it together." The words sent a warm feeling through Helena's chest that had nothing to do with the fire. She studied Kade's face in the flickering light, noting the determined set of his jaw and the protective concern in his eyes. Somewhere over the past few days, this stranger who had offered her a ride had become something more, though she was not quite ready to examine what that might mean. "Together," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." They reached Carson City late in the afternoon, 3 days after leaving Mabel's station. The town was larger and more prosperous than Pioche, with proper streets and substantial buildings that spoke of wealth from the nearby Comstock lode mines. Helena felt simultaneously relieved to reach their destination and anxious about what came next. Kade took them first to a modest hotel on the edge of town, one that catered to ranch hands and travelers rather than the wealthy mine owners and merchants. He secured 2 rooms, side by side, and Helena nearly wept with gratitude at the prospect of a real bed and a bath. "Rest up," Kade told her as he handed her a room key. "I need to meet with the horse seller, and that will probably take a few hours. We can get dinner after and figure out our next steps." Helena spent a glorious hour soaking in a copper bathtub, washing away days of dust and worry. The hotel provided soap and towels, and she emerged feeling more human than she had since fleeing Pioche. She washed her spare clothes and hung them to dry, then laid out on the bed in her chemise and just breathed, letting herself fully feel the magnitude of what she had done. She had escaped. She had actually done it. Whatever came next, she was here, free and making her own choices. A knock on the door roused her from her thoughts. She wrapped herself in a robe the hotel had provided and opened the door cautiously, finding Kade in the hallway looking pleased. "The horses are perfect," he said without preamble. 20 head of young stock, good bloodlines, exactly what I was hoping for. I am picking them up tomorrow morning and driving them out to the property." He paused, seeming to realize Helena was not fully dressed, and cleared his throat. "Sorry, I can come back when you are ready." "No, it is fine," Helena said quickly, not wanting to lose this moment of shared excitement. "Tell me about them. What makes them so perfect?" Kade's whole face lit up as he described the horses, their qualities and potential. Helena found herself smiling at his enthusiasm, the way his usual reserve fell away when talking about something he loved. She realized she could listen to him talk about horses for hours and never get bored. "Anyway," Kade concluded, "I wanted to ask if you are still interested in helping with the training. The offer stands, but I will understand if you want to move on now that we are here." Helena did not hesitate. "I am interested," she said firmly. "I want to see this through, see these horses you are so excited about. Besides, I still need to earn enough to get to San Francisco properly, and I cannot think of anything I would rather do than work with horses." "Good," Kade said, and the relief in his voice suggested he had been more worried about her answer than he had let on. "That is good. Get dressed and we will celebrate with a proper meal. There is a restaurant down the street that serves the best steaks in Nevada." The restaurant was noisy and crowded, full of miners and cowboys and businessmen all talking loudly and shouting for service. Helena felt conspicuous at first, one of the few women in the room, but Kade found them a table in the corner and proved to be right about the steaks. The food was excellent, hearty and satisfying after days of trail rations. As they ate, Kade sketched out his plans for the ranch. The property was about an hour's ride from Carson City, remote enough for privacy but close enough to access markets and supplies. There was a small house, just 2 rooms and a loft that needed some work but was livable. Corrals and a barn were already in place, though they too needed repairs. "It is going to be a lot of work," he admitted. "Probably take a year or more to get it properly running, but the potential is there. Once I get the first batch of horses trained and sold, I can reinvest in more stock, gradually build up the operation." "It sounds wonderful," Helena said sincerely. "You must be so proud to finally be starting this." "Proud and terrified," Kade replied with a laugh. 6 years of savings are riding on this venture. If I fail, I am back to square one." "You will not fail," Helena said with conviction she had not known she possessed. "You know horses, you have planned carefully, and you are willing to work hard. That is a recipe for success." Kade met her eyes across the table, and something passed between them, a connection that felt deeper than their few days of acquaintance could account for. Helena felt her breath catch, suddenly hyper-aware of the intimacy of sharing a meal, of the way the lamplight brought out copper highlights in Kade's dark hair. The moment was broken by a commotion at the door. A group of men entered, loud and clearly already drunk, despite the relatively early hour. Helena started to dismiss them as just another party of rowdy miners, but then one of them turned and she felt her blood freeze. It was Robert Winters, Charles's younger brother, along with several men she recognized from Pioche. Helena ducked her head quickly, hoping they had not seen her, but it was too late. Robert's eyes swept the room and landed on their table with unmistakable recognition. He said something to his companions, and they began pushing through the crowd toward them. "We need to leave," Helena said urgently, her hand finding Kade's across the table. "Now. That is Charles Winters's brother, and he has seen me." Kade did not hesitate. He dropped money on the table to cover their meal and stood, positioning himself between Helena and the approaching men. "Back door," he asked the waiter who was passing. "Through the kitchen," the man replied, taking in the situation with quick understanding. "Hurry." They wove through the tables toward the kitchen, but Robert and his men were faster. They cut off the path, forming a semicircle that trapped Helena and Kade against the wall. "Helena Marie," Robert said, his voice carrying the same cold arrogance his brother possessed. "You have led us on quite a chase. My brother is most anxious to see you returned home." "I am not going back," Helena said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear thrumming through her veins. "And you have no right to force me." "No right," Robert laughed, an ugly sound. You humiliated my family, destroyed a business arrangement that took months to negotiate. You think you can just walk away from that? Father has already spoken to the sheriff. You will be returned to Pioche to face the consequences of your actions. She is not going anywhere she does not want to go, Kade said quietly, but there was steel in his voice that made several of Robert's men step back instinctively. Robert's eyes narrowed as he assessed Kade properly for the first time. And who might you be? The cowboy whore she ran off with. The insult hung in the air for a moment, and Helena saw Kade's hands curl into fists. But before anyone could move, a new voice cut through the tension. Robert Winters, you are drunk and making a scene in my establishment. I suggest you leave before I have you thrown out. The restaurant owner had appeared, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and a face that suggested he would be happy to enforce his suggestion personally. Behind him, several other large men had materialized, all wearing the same expression of professional menace. Robert clearly wanted to argue, but he was outnumbered and knew it. This is not over, he said, directing the words at Helena. You belong to my brother, and he always collects what is his. She does not belong to anyone, Kade said flatly. Now get out before things get ugly. For a moment, Helena thought Robert might actually be foolish enough to start a fight, but survival instinct won out over pride. He and his men backed toward the door, though his eyes never left Helena's face. You will regret this, he promised. Both of you. Then they were gone, spilling back out into the street with shouts and curses. The restaurant owner shook his head. You two should probably make yourselves scarce for a while, he advised. The Winters family has pull in this town, and Robert is mean when he is drinking. They will be back with reinforcements. Thank you, Kade said sincerely. We will be leaving first thing in the morning. They hurried back to the hotel through side streets, both of them tense and watching for pursuit. Once safely in the narrow hallway between their rooms, Helena finally allowed herself to shake. I am sorry, she whispered. I keep saying that, but I truly am. You have helped me so much, and now you are in real danger because of me. Kade took her gently by the shoulders, his hands warm and steady. Listen to me, he said firmly. I made my choice to help you with full knowledge of the risks. I do not regret it, and I will not abandon you now. We will figure this out. Helena looked up into his face, seeing the determination there, the loyalty and strength. Something broke open inside her, a wall she had been building her whole life against disappointment and betrayal. Without letting herself think about it, she rose on her toes and kissed him. For a moment, Kade went absolutely still with surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he was kissing her back with a gentleness that made her want to cry. It was nothing like the chaste, obligatory kisses Charles had pressed on her during their courtship. This was warm and real and full of feeling that Helena had no words for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kade rested his forehead against hers. Helena, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I need you to understand something. I want you to come to the ranch, not just to help with horses. I want you there because I cannot imagine starting this new life without you. These past few days, getting to know you, they have meant more to me than I can say. I feel the same way, Helena admitted, her hands fisting in his shirt to keep him close. I do not understand it. We have known each other less than a week, but I trust you more than I have ever trusted anyone. When I think about the future now, you are in it. Then come with me, Kade said urgently. Not as an employee, but as my partner. We will build this ranch together, build a life together. I know it is fast, probably too fast by any reasonable measure, but I have never been more certain of anything. Helena knew she should be cautious, should point out all the logical reasons why this was madness. But standing here in this shabby hotel hallway with Kade's arms around her and his heart beating against her palms, logic seemed vastly overrated. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. Yes to the ranch and the horses and building something together. Yes to you." Kade's answering smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. He kissed her again, longer and deeper, and Helena felt the last pieces of her old life falling away. She was no longer Helena Marie of Pioche, dutiful daughter and reluctant bride. She was simply Helena, a woman choosing her own path and her own partner. A noise from the street below made them both freeze. Voices, angry and searching. Robert had returned with reinforcements just as predicted. "We need to leave," Kade said reluctantly, releasing her. "Pack what you can carry. We will get the horses and head to the ranch tonight instead of waiting for morning. Once we are there, we can defend our position better." They moved quickly, gathering their few possessions and meeting back in the hallway within minutes. Kade had his rifle and saddlebags, while Helena carried the small bundle of clothes and supplies she had accumulated. They slipped out the back stairs of the hotel and made their way through darkened alleys to the stable where Kade had left Molly and the wagon. The stable hand was a young man who asked no questions when Kade pressed extra money into his hand and requested speed. Within 20 minutes, they were rolling out of Carson City on the western road, the night dark around them and pursuit hopefully delayed by the time it would take Robert to search the hotel. "How far to the ranch?" Helena asked, straining her eyes to see the road ahead in the dim starlight. "About 5 miles, Kade replied. "Not far, but we need to take it slow in the dark. Cannot risk Molly stepping wrong and going lame." They traveled in tense silence, every sound making them jump and scan for followers. But the road remained empty, and gradually they left the lights of Carson City behind. The darkness was absolute, broken only by stars overhead and the occasional glow of a distant ranch house. After what felt like hours but was probably less than one, Kade turned Molly off the main road onto a smaller track that wound through scrub, pine, and brush. "Almost there," he said quietly. "The house is just around this bend." The ranch appeared as a darker shadow against the darkness, a small structure with a slightly larger building behind it that had to be the barn. Kade drove the wagon directly to the barn, and they both jumped down to quickly unharness Molly and get her settled with water and feed. The barn was in rough shape. Helena could see even by lamplight, with gaps in the walls and a roof that probably leaked in places. But it was sound enough for now, and there were stalls for a dozen horses plus a tack room and storage area. "Come on," Kade said once Molly was settled. "Let us get inside and barricade the door. We can relax once we know we are secure." The house was small but charming in its way, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a bedroom off to one side, and a ladder leading to a loft space under the eaves. It was sparsely furnished but clean, and someone had left a supply of firewood and basics in the kitchen. Kade moved around the space with efficient purpose, checking windows and doors, securing anything that could be used for entry. Helena found herself standing in the middle of the main room, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The adrenaline that had been carrying her was finally draining away, leaving her shaky and overwhelmed. "Hey," Kade said softly, materializing beside her and pulling her into his arms. "It is all right. We are safe here. You are safe." Helena buried her face in his chest and allowed herself a moment of weakness, just breathing in his scent of leather and horses and pine smoke. "I am sorry," she mumbled against his shirt. "I do not usually fall apart like this." "You have had a rough week," Kade pointed out with gentle humor. "I think you are entitled to fall apart a little. Come on, let us get you sitting down." He guided her to the one comfortable chair in the room and then busied himself building a fire in the stone hearth. Soon warmth and light were spreading through the space, pushing back the darkness and the lingering fear. Kade made coffee and they sat together, not talking much, just finding comfort in each other's presence. "What happens tomorrow?" Helena finally asked. "Will they come looking for us here?" "Maybe," Kade admitted. "The property is in my name, so if they ask around they could find it, but we are within our rights here. This is my land and you are here of your own free will. Even if they get the sheriff involved, he cannot force you to go back to Pioche. Unless my father claims I am mentally unfit or some such nonsense," Helena said bitterly. "Or unless Charles actually has legal grounds to claim breach of contract. I do not know what agreements were made between them." "Then we will deal with that if it happens," Kade said firmly. "But I will not let them take you. I promise you that." Helena believed him. Whatever came, she knew Kade would stand by her. The certainty of it was still strange and new, this feeling of having someone truly on her side. They talked late into the night, making plans and contingencies, but also sharing dreams and hopes for the future. Kade described his vision for the ranch in more detail, the breeding program he wanted to establish, and the reputation he hoped to build. Helena found herself contributing ideas, drawing on her own experience with horses, and surprising herself with how much knowledge she had accumulated over the years. Eventually, exhaustion won out over anxiety. Kade insisted Helena take the bedroom while he made himself a pallet on the floor of the main room, positioned where he could watch the door. Helena wanted to argue, but she was too tired to make a convincing case. She fell asleep almost instantly, lulled by the knowledge that Kade was standing watch. She woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a disoriented moment, she could not remember where she was, then everything came rushing back. The flight from Pioche, meeting Kade, the journey to Carson City, and finally their late-night arrival at the ranch. Helena rose and dressed quickly in her practical traveling clothes, braiding her hair with swift efficiency. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Kade at the stove, cooking breakfast with the air of a man who had been taking care of himself for years. "Good morning," he said with a smile that made her heart skip. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Helena admitted. "I thought I would lie awake worrying, but I was out almost before my head hit the pillow." "That is exhaustion for you," Kade replied. "Eat something. We have got a big day ahead of us. I need to go collect those horses this morning, and I could use your help getting them settled." They ate quickly, both of them eager to begin this new chapter. The fear and tension of the night before had not disappeared, but in the light of day it felt more manageable. They had a plan, a place to be, and work to do. Whatever came, they would face it together. The journey to collect the horses took them back toward Carson City, but to a ranch on the outskirts rather than into town itself. The seller, an older man named Thompson, greeted them warmly and showed obvious pride in the stock he had raised. "These are good horses," he told Kade as they walked among the young animals in the corral. "Solid bloodlines, good temperaments. Treat them right and they will serve you well." Helena watched as Kade examined each horse carefully, running his hands over legs and backs, checking teeth and eyes with practiced efficiency. She could see the expertise he had talked about, the deep knowledge that came from years of dedicated study and experience. "What do you think?" Kade asked, surprising her by soliciting her opinion. "You have an eye for horses. Do you see any concerns?" Helena moved among the animals, letting them get used to her presence before touching them. There was a young bay mare that seemed particularly nervous, shying away from contact, and Helena pointed her out. "That one might need extra time and patience," she observed. "She has been spooked by something." Thompson nodded approvingly. Smart eye. She came from a rough situation before I got her. Been working with her, but she is still skittish. She will come around with the right handling, though. She has got good potential. We can work with that, Kade said, his eyes meeting Helena's with approval and something warmer. Between the two of us, I reckon we can gentle just about any horse. The transaction was completed with a handshake and the exchange of money that represented the bulk of Kade's savings. Helena felt the weight of that trust, the fact that he was embarking on this venture with her by his side. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Getting 20 horses back to Kade's ranch proved to be an adventure. They moved as a loose herd, with Kade on Molly taking the lead and Helena riding one of the gentler horses to bring up the rear. The animals were young and easily distracted, wanting to investigate every interesting smell or sound along the road. By the time they finally had all 20 horses secured in the barn and corrals at the ranch, the sun was setting and both Kade and Helena were exhausted but triumphant. They stood at the corral fence, watching their new charges settle in, and Helena felt a surge of pride at what they had accomplished. "We did it," she said softly. "This is really happening." "This is really happening," Kade agreed. His arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close against his side. "Helena, I meant what I said last night. I want to build this life with you, not just as business partners, but as more. I know we have not known each other long, and you have every reason to be cautious after what you ran from. But I am a patient man, and I will wait as long as you need." Helena turned to face him fully, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "I do not want you to wait," she said clearly. "I know my own mind, Kade Warner. These past few days have shown me what I should have understood years ago. Life is too short to waste on obligations and other people's expectations. I want to build this ranch with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing I get to spend the day working beside you, and I want to fall asleep every night in your arms." Kade's response was to kiss her, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not right away if you are not ready, but say you will eventually. Say you will be my partner in every sense of the word." "Yes," Helena said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you whenever you want, whenever feels right. The answer is yes." They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other and watching their horses, and Helena felt a contentment she had never experienced before. This was what she had been running toward without knowing it, this sense of being exactly where she belonged. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm that felt both natural and right. They rose with the sun and worked until exhaustion sent them to bed each night. The horses needed constant attention, training, feeding, and care. The ranch itself needed repairs and improvements that never seemed to end. They saw no sign of Robert Winters or anyone else from Pioche, though Kade made regular trips into Carson City for supplies and kept his ears open for any talk. There were rumors, apparently. The story of the runaway bride and her cowboy had spread through the social circles that cared about such things. But without hard evidence of wrongdoing or any legal grounds to force Helena's return, there was little Charles or her father could actually do. Helena wrote a letter to her aunt in San Francisco, explaining in careful terms what had happened and asking if she would be willing to serve as a character reference should the need arise. The response came 3 weeks later, warm and supportive, with her aunt expressing pride in Helena's courage and offering any help she might need. She also mentioned that if we ever want to expand the ranch's market, she knows several people in San Francisco who are looking for quality horses. Helena told Kade as they sat together after dinner one evening, reviewing the day's progress. "She thinks we could command good prices there. Your aunt sounds like a remarkable woman, Kade observed. Maybe we should visit her once we get the first batch of horses trained and sold. San Francisco has always interested me, and I would like to meet family of yours who actually appreciates you. I would like that, Helena said, then hesitated. Kade, there is something I have been thinking about. This ranch, this life we are building, it is ours together. But legally, everything is in your name. I do not have any claim to it beyond your goodwill. Kade looked up from the papers he had been reviewing, his expression serious. You are worried I might turn out like Charles, that I would use that against you. No, Helena said quickly. Not exactly. I trust you, I do, but I have learned that trust is not the same as protection. Women have so few rights, so little power in these situations. If something happened to you, I would have no legal standing here. And after fighting so hard to escape one trap, I do not want to inadvertently walk into another. Instead of being offended, Kade nodded slowly. You are right, he said. I had not thought about it that way, but you are absolutely right. Tomorrow we will go into town and have the property deed amended to include your name. Equal ownership, equal say in everything. And if we marry, we will make sure the paperwork protects your interests. Helena felt a wave of love so strong it almost hurt. This was what partnership looked like, she realized. Not one person controlling everything while the other submitted, but two people working together to build something fair and just. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For understanding, for not making me feel foolish for wanting that protection. You are not foolish, Kade said firmly. You are smart and careful, and those are good qualities. I want you to feel secure here, Helena. This is your home as much as mine, and it always will be. They went to Carson City the next day and made the legal arrangements Kade had promised. The lawyer they consulted raised his eyebrows at the unusual request, but completed the paperwork without comment. Helena Marie was now the joint owner of the ranch, with full legal rights to everything. As they left the lawyer's office, Helena felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had not fully recognized she was carrying. She was safe, truly safe, with her own legal claim to her home and future. Want to get married while we are in town? Kade asked casually, as if suggesting they stop for lunch. Unless you want a big ceremony. I am happy to wait if you do. Helena thought about the elaborate wedding that had been planned in Pioche, the hundreds of guests and expensive dress and exhausting social performance it would have been. Then she thought about standing in a simple office with Kade, making promises that meant something, building a life based on truth rather than appearances. Let us do it, she said decisively. Right now, today. I do not need a big ceremony, I just need you. They found a minister willing to perform a quick ceremony in his small church, with his wife and the church secretary serving as witnesses. Helena wore her practical traveling clothes, and Kade wore the same trail-worn outfit he had been wearing when they met. There were no flowers, no music, no elaborate rituals, and it was perfect. As they exchanged simple vows, promising to love and support each other in building their life together, Helena felt tears streaming down her cheeks. But these were tears of joy, of relief, of knowing she had found something real and true. When Kade slipped a simple gold band on her finger and she did the same for him, she knew she was finally, fully free of her old life. I love you, she whispered as they sealed their vows with a kiss. I love you too, Kade replied, his voice rough with emotion. My wife. They celebrated their impromptu wedding with dinner at a nice restaurant, not the rowdy place where they had encountered Robert, but somewhere quieter and more intimate. They talked and laughed, giddy with the enormity of what they had done, and made plans for their future with the certainty of people who knew exactly what they wanted. It was late when they finally returned to the ranch, now truly their ranch in every sense. Kade carried Helena over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture, and then they were in each other's arms with a desperation born of weeks of restraint. That night, they made their marriage real in every way, discovering each other with patience and passion. Helena had been taught to view intimacy as a duty, something to be endured for the sake of bearing heirs. But with Kade, it was nothing like that. It was joyful and tender and intensely connecting, an expression of everything they felt for each other. Afterward, lying in Kade's arms in the narrow bed, Helena felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. "I did not know it could be like this," she admitted quietly. "Any of it. The partnership, the respect, the way you make me feel." "This is how it should be," Kade replied, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Two people choosing each other, building something together. I am glad I could show you that, Helena, and I promise to keep showing you every day for the rest of our lives." The weeks turned into months, and the ranch began to take shape as a real operation. The horses responded well to their training, with Helena proving to have a natural talent for working with the more skittish animals. The nervous bay mare, whom Helena had named Willow, became particularly attached to her and blossomed into a beautiful, responsive mount. Word began to spread about the quality of horses coming from the Warner Ranch, and they had their first sale 6 months after they started. A wealthy rancher from California paid top dollar for 3 trained horses, including Willow, though Helena found saying goodbye to the mare difficult. "She is going to a good home," Kade reminded her gently, "and we will train more. That is the nature of this business." "I know," Helena sighed. "I just get attached." "That is what makes you good at this," Kade pointed out. "You care about them as individuals, not just as products. The horses feel that, and they respond to it." They were working in the barn one winter morning when a visitor arrived unexpectedly. Helena looked up from the bridle. She was mending to see a fine carriage rolling up the track to the house, completely out of place in their rustic setting. "Are you expecting anyone?" she asked Kade, feeling a flutter of old anxiety. "No," he replied, his hand automatically going to the rifle that was always within reach these days. "Stay here while I see what they want." But Helena followed anyway, unable to simply hide while danger potentially approached. They emerged from the barn together, presenting a united front as the carriage came to a stop. The door opened and a woman stepped out, elegant in expensive traveling clothes. It took Helena a moment to recognize her own mother. "Mama," she said, shock and confusion warring in her voice. "What are you doing here?" Helena Marie studied her daughter with an expression that was hard to read. She took in Helena's practical clothing, the confidence in her bearing, and the way she stood close to Kade's side. Then her eyes dropped to the gold wedding band on Helena's left hand. "So it is true," Victoria said quietly. "You married him." "I did," Helena confirmed, raising her chin defiantly. "This is my husband, Kade Warner. Kade, this is my mother, Helena Marie." Kade nodded politely but did not extend his hand, clearly unsure of his reception. Victoria continued to study them both, and Helena braced herself for accusations and recriminations. Instead, Victoria said something Helena never expected. "May I come inside? I would like to talk with you both, if you are willing." They moved cautiously into the house, Kade keeping himself positioned protectively near Helena. Victoria sat in the comfortable chair and accepted the coffee Helena automatically prepared, habits of hostessing ingrained too deep to disappear easily. "I am not here to try to take you back," Victoria said without preamble. "Though your father does not know that, he still believes I am in San Francisco visiting my sister." "Then why are you here?" Helena asked, sitting on the simple bench beside Kade. Victoria took a long moment to answer, her eyes distant. When you ran from that church, I was furious, humiliated, devastated at what I saw as your selfishness and ingratitude." She paused, her hands tightening around the coffee cup. "But then I started hearing the rumors about what you had done and where you had gone, and I realized something I should have understood years ago." "What is that?" Helena asked carefully. "That you were braver than I ever was," Victoria replied softly. "I was married to your father when I was 18, an arrangement made by my family for business purposes. I did not love him. I do not love him now. But I went through with it because that was what was expected, what I had been taught was my duty. And I have spent 23 years in a marriage that feels like a prison." Helena felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Her mother had always seemed so perfect, so controlled and proper. To hear her admit to unhappiness was jarring. "When I heard that you had run away, that you had chosen your own path and found someone who actually values you," Victoria continued, her eyes now on Kade, "I realized I had been wrong. About everything. About what I owed you as a mother, about what kind of future I should have wanted for you." "Mama," Helena whispered, not sure what else to say. Victoria set down her coffee and leaned forward earnestly. "I came to apologize. For pushing you toward Charles, for not listening when you tried to tell me you did not want to marry him. For raising you to believe that duty was more important than happiness. You deserved better and I failed you." "You did what you thought was right," Helena said, though her voice shook. "You were doing what you had been taught." "That does not excuse it," Victoria replied firmly. "But I hope, maybe someday, you might forgive me. And I hope you will let me be part of your life, if only in a small way. I would like to know the person you are becoming, now that you are free to become her." Helena looked at Kade, who gave her a small nod that said the decision was entirely hers. She turned back to her mother and saw not the remote, perfect figure of her childhood, but a woman who had made mistakes and was trying to acknowledge them. "I would like that," Helena said slowly. "But I need you to understand, Mama, this is my life now. Kade is my husband, this ranch is my home. I am not coming back to Pioche, not even to visit. If you want to be part of my life, it has to be on my terms." "I understand," Victoria said. "And I accept that. Your father may never forgive you for what you have done, but I think you were right to do it. You saw a trap and you escaped it. I just wish I had been strong enough to do the same at your age." They talked for another hour, and it was strange and difficult, but also healing in ways Helena had not expected. Victoria told her about life in Pioche after the wedding scandal, how Charles had raged for weeks before ultimately marrying a widow from Virginia City, who was content to be his ornament. Helena's father had disowned his daughter publicly, but Victoria quietly maintained that he might come around eventually, though she did not sound confident. When Victoria finally took her leave, she embraced Helena tightly. "Be happy," she whispered. "That is all I really want for you now. Just be happy." "I am," Helena assured her. "Happier than I ever thought possible." After Victoria's carriage disappeared down the track, Helena and Kade stood together in front of their small house, his arm around her shoulders. "That was unexpected," Kade observed. "That is one word for it," Helena agreed. She leaned into his solid warmth, feeling the weight of the encounter settling over her. "I think that might be the first real conversation I have ever had with my mother. How do you feel about it?" Helena considered the question seriously. "Strange. Sad for her for what she has missed by staying in a loveless marriage, but also glad. Glad she came, glad she understands now why I ran. It feels like closure in a way." "Good," Kade said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Everyone deserves closure. Come on, those horses are not going to train themselves." They returned to work, and life continued in its steady rhythm. Winter gave way to spring, and with the warmer weather came new opportunities and new challenges. They acquired more horses, expanded their training program, and began building a reputation that extended beyond Nevada into California and beyond. Helena discovered she was pregnant in May, nearly a year after she had run from her wedding. The realization filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had never really thought about motherhood before, had certainly never wanted to bear Charles Winters's children. But the idea of bringing Kade's child into the world, of expanding their small family, felt right in ways she could not fully articulate. "We are going to need to add onto the house," Kade said practically when she told him, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "A baby needs proper space." "We have time," Helena replied, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "But yes, we will need more room eventually." They expanded the house that summer, adding 2 rooms and a proper porch. Helena continued working with the horses as long as she felt capable, only retiring to lighter duties as her pregnancy advanced. Kade was protective but not smothering, understanding her need to remain active and useful. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1887, with a midwife from Carson City attending and Kade pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When he was finally allowed in to meet his child, Helena watched his face transform with wonder and love. "He is perfect," Kade whispered, carefully taking the baby from Helena's arms. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Kade's grandfather who had been kind to him as a boy. Young Thomas was a healthy, loud baby who quickly became the center of their world. Helena had worried she might not have maternal instincts, but they came naturally when the baby was truly wanted, and the father was a true partner in parenting. Victoria visited when Thomas was 3 months old, bearing gifts and exclaiming over her grandson with genuine delight. She returned every few months after that, their relationship slowly building into something real and honest. Helena's father never acknowledged his grandchild, but Victoria quietly suggested he was beginning to soften, though it might take years for him to fully come around. The ranch continued to prosper. By Thomas's 2nd birthday, they had 20 horses in training at any given time and a waiting list of buyers. Kade had developed a particular specialty in training riding horses for women, understanding that female riders had different needs and preferences than men. Helena worked alongside him, and together they created a business model that was both profitable and personally satisfying. They made their first trip to San Francisco when Thomas was 3, finally meeting Helena's Aunt Margaret, who proved to be everything her letters had suggested: warm, independent, and delighted with the life her niece had built. The trip was partly business, establishing contacts for their horses in the California market, but mostly pleasure, showing their son the ocean and exploring a city neither of them had seen before. "I am glad we came here," Helena said as they stood on the beach, watching Thomas chase waves with fearless enthusiasm. "But I am also glad it is not where we ended up." "Not enough room for horses," Kade agreed with a smile, pulling her close against the ocean breeze. "Though I suppose we could visit more often. Thomas seems to like it." "He likes everything," Helena replied fondly. "He is fearless, just like his father." "He gets that from his mother," Kade countered. "The woman who ran from her own wedding and convinced a strange cowboy to help her escape. That is the definition of fearless." Helena thought about that moment now, standing in her wedding dress on that dusty Nevada road while Kade pulled his wagon to a stop beside her. So much had changed since then, and yet the core of who they were remained the same. She was still the woman who chose freedom over security, and he was still the man who offered help without expecting anything in return. "Need a ride," she quoted, remembering his first words to her, Kade laughed, understanding immediately. That seems like a lifetime ago. It was a lifetime ago, Helena said. A whole different life. I am glad I got into that wagon. So am I, Kade replied quietly. Best decision I ever made, stopping for a runaway bride. They returned to the ranch renewed and ready for the next chapter. Helena discovered she was pregnant again, and this time she felt only joy, without any of the fear that had accompanied her first pregnancy. Their daughter, Sarah, was born in the spring of 1891, named for the sister Kade had lost and carrying forward her memory with love rather than grief. The years passed in a blur of hard work, laughter, occasional challenges, and deep contentment. Thomas proved to have his father's gift with horses, spending every possible moment in the barn and corrals. Sarah was more interested in the business side of things, keeping careful records of sales and expenses from the moment she was old enough to write. Helena's father finally relented and visited the ranch when Thomas was 10, and Sarah was 7. It was an awkward visit, full of unspoken regrets and careful politeness, but it marked a kind of peace between them. He never apologized for trying to force Helena into marriage with Charles Winters, but he acknowledged that she had built a good life and raised fine children, which was perhaps as close to approval as he could manage. Charles Winters himself died in a mining accident in 1893, and Helena felt nothing but relief at the news. His widow remarried within 6 months, moving to California and taking her substantial inheritance with her. Robert Winters drank himself to death 2 years later, and with their passing, the last shadows of Helena's old life finally faded away completely. The ranch continued to grow and prosper into the new century. They added more land, more buildings, more horses. Hired hands came and went, but the core remained Helena and Kade, still working side by side as they had from the beginning, still partners in every sense of the word. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they hosted a celebration at the ranch. Victoria came, now a widow herself and living independently in Carson City. Aunt Margaret came from San Francisco, along with several of Helena's friends from the city. The ranch hands and their families came, and buyers from across 3 states, and neighbors who had become friends over the years. As the sun set and lanterns were lit across the property, Helena stood with Kade watching their guests enjoy themselves. Thomas was showing off his training techniques to an impressed audience, and Sarah was charming potential buyers with her knowledge of their breeding program. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Helena asked, leaning into Kade's familiar warmth. "That day on the road to Carson City when you stopped for a woman in a wedding dress, did you have any idea?" "I knew you were important," Kade replied thoughtfully. "I felt it the moment I saw you, did not know exactly what it meant yet, but I knew I was not going to just drive past and leave you there." "I thought you were going to be my escape," Helena said softly. "Just a ride away from danger, nothing more." "I had no idea you were going to become my whole world." "Funny how things work out," Kade observed. "You were running away from a wedding and you ended up in one anyway. Better one, I hope." "So much better," Helena confirmed. "The best. You gave me everything I did not know I wanted. Partnership. Respect, love, a life that is truly mine. Ours," Kade corrected gently. "A life that is truly ours." As if to emphasize his point, Thomas called out for them to come join the party, and they moved together into the warm circle of light and laughter, surrounded by the life they had built from a chance meeting on a dusty road. The years continued to roll forward, bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas married a smart young woman from Carson City and brought her to live at the ranch, where she proved to be as capable with horses as any of them. Sarah shocked everyone by deciding to become a lawyer, one of the first women in Nevada to do so, and used her position to fight for women's property rights and fair treatment under the law. Helena and Kade became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree branch and grow in ways they had never imagined that day on the road from Pioche. The ranch passed from their hands to Thomas's, though they remained involved as long as they were able, still offering advice and still working with horses, because they could never imagine doing anything else. They grew old together, their bodies weathering like the wood of the barn they had built together, strong and enduring. Helena's dark hair turned white, and Kade's beard followed suit, but their love remained as constant as the Nevada sky above them. On a warm spring evening in 1935, 50 years after that fateful meeting, they sat together on the porch of the house they had expanded over the years. Thomas and his wife managed the ranch now, and their grandchildren ran the training programs, but Helena and Kade still lived in the original 2 rooms, the heart of the home they had built together. "You have any regrets?" Kade asked, a question that had become ritual over the years. "Not a single one," Helena replied, the same answer she had given every time. "You? Only that I did not see you walking down that road sooner," Kade said, squeezing her hand gently. "Could have had even more years together." "We have had a good run," Helena said contentedly. "Better than most people ever get. We built something real, Kade, not just the ranch but us. We built us from nothing but a chance encounter and a willingness to take a risk on each other." "Best risk I ever took," Kade agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, as the sun set over the land they had shaped together, watching their legacy carry on in the people they had raised and the business they had built. The nervous runaway bride and the cowboy who had stopped to offer her a ride had become pillars of their community, respected and loved by all who knew them. Helena thought back to that morning in Pioche, standing in her wedding dress in the church, feeling the walls closing in around her. She remembered the moment of clarity, the absolute certainty that she had to run or lose herself forever. She remembered the terror and exhilaration of that flight, and the sound of wagon wheels on the road ahead. "Need a ride?" Those 2 simple words had changed everything, had opened a door to a future she could never have imagined. As darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead, Helena rested her head on Kade's shoulder and smiled. She had run from a church in her wedding dress, and a cowboy on the road had asked if she needed a ride. She had said yes, and in doing so had found not just escape but everything she had been searching for without knowing it: love, partnership, freedom, home. They had built it all together, one day at a time, one horse at a time, one choice at a time. And it had been more than enough. It had been everything. Helena closed her eyes, feeling the evening breeze on her face and Kade's steady presence beside her, and knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Running toward this life, this love, this man, had been the bravest and best decision she had ever made. And as the last light faded from the Nevada sky, Helena Warner, formerly Helena Marie of Pioche, felt nothing but gratitude for the dusty road, the wedding dress she had left behind, and the cowboy who had stopped to change her life forever.